This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the best all-in-one platform for any of your website building needs. Hey guys, it's Celestia, and if there's one piece of art advice that you can count on to start a fight just by giving it, it's learn the rules before you break them. And you wouldn't guess how hated this advice actually is by how frequently it's given. Not only is it something almost every artist has either said or heard at least once, it's widely regarded as one of the most factually accurate and effective pieces of advice out there for art education. Learning the rules before breaking them, or to be more literal, learning the fundamentals of art before learning how to stylize it, has been considered the best, most trusted, most reliable method of improving as an artist for a long time, with many or even most viewing it as the one true, proper way to study art. That in mind, it's no surprising that it's the piece of advice given to artists more than almost any other. What's more surprising, to some at least, is how much a lot of those artists absolutely hate hearing it. And for a long time, I wrote that off as the same kind of anger a kid would feel when told that they need to finish their homework before they can play video games. An anger that comes from having to prioritize your needs over your wants, and subsequently an anger that is unavoidable, because doing so is a necessary part of life for most. Unless you're a Nepo baby, I guess. That didn't diminish its significance to me, but it did leave me with the perspective that people hated this advice because it meant they couldn't draw what they wanted, how they wanted to, right away. Not because the advice itself was wrong. And to be clear, I'm not saying it is wrong, but learning the rules before you break them has been so widely accepted for so long as the art golden rule that many artists, myself included, never really questioned its legitimacy, even if we wished it wasn't good advice, because following it was tedious and time-consuming. We didn't want to, but we knew we needed to. Or we thought we did. I did, anyway. Over the last few years of making videos on this channel, I've shared quite a few opinions about this advice. In the beginning, my stance was that it was correct, but if followed too rigidly, it could take the joy out of art for some and deter others from making it at all, so it should be taken with a grain of salt. Later, that developed into a much more lenient stance that learning the rules while you break them is a much better approach, since that allows for more balance. You're working to improve your skills while still drawing what makes you passionate about art at the same time. But the more I've watched people discuss this advice more critically online and heard their opinions, the more my own has changed. I realized that I might have written off the anger that artists express when hearing it too absolutely, without considering that there could be legitimate reasons to be angry other than simply, well, not wanting to listen to it because listening to it sucks. That is all it is for some, but others have cited much more thought-provoking concerns with the advice's actual effectiveness that have finally made me question whether the age-old advice I've been hearing since grade school was really as faultless as I thought it was. So because of that shift in perspective and the fact that this advice as a whole has become so increasingly and surprisingly controversial, I felt like it warranted a video of its own. So here we are. In today's video, I'll go over both primary opinions on learning the rules before you break them. Those who think it's good advice, whether artists want to hear it or not, and those who think it's bad advice that isn't as universally applicable as people say it is. And hopefully, by the end, I'll be able to present you with a vaguely coherent conclusion as to where I stand on the matter after considering both. But first, let me take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace, a longtime partner of the channel that is graciously putting up with all of the jokes that I'm married to them because of how often and aggressively I gush about them. And I can tell you now, once and for all, Duchess Celestia x Squarespace confirmed, because I sincerely believe they're the best website building and hosting platform out there. I've been using Squarespace since long before I started working with them on the channel, primarily to create and host my personal Duchess Celestia portfolio site, which really drove home for me that they're the perfect option for any artist looking to build their own. That's in no small part due to the massive library of professionally designed templates they offer, with categories that are perfect not just for art portfolios, but for any kind of site you could possibly need to build. Each one is completely customizable too, which means you have the freedom and tools to make them your own. From adding some of their many useful features and maximizing your site's functionality, to using their extensive visual design tools to establish polished, professional brand recognition, there's really nothing you can't do. You can even turn it into an online store just as easily by using the Squarespace commerce platform, which lets you do everything. Manage your inventory, take sales, even print shipping labels. And it's just as easy for your customers. Squarespace offers all of the most popular payment options like Klarna, ACH Direct Debit, Apple Pay, Afterpay, and ClearPay, as well as the option to send individualized invoices to specific clients, which is perfect for artists taking commissions. Whether you're an artist in need of a portfolio, an entrepreneur building an online store, a creator setting up an interactive blog, or a small business owner making a landing page, Squarespace is the place to do it. And you can find out yourself by going to squarespace.com to get your own free trial today. And once you've built the perfect site that you're ready to launch, you can get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain by going to squarespace.com/DuchessCelestia, linked in the description. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video, and please go check them out. Now, let's get into why such a seemingly innocuous, harmless piece of art advice has become so controversial in the art community. Because, after all, there's a reason it's been given with such confidence for such a long time. It's good advice. It works. It certainly did for me, and I've heard countless others say the same. There is a lot of truth to it. So before I get into why people hate it, I'd first like to explain why people don't. There is no shortage of people who firmly believe that learning the fundamentals before stylization is the best and only way to learn art, and they do have some pretty good reasons to. The first is that, quite simply, it's almost always applicable no matter what type of art you want to get good at making. Regardless of the style you're working in or the degree to which you exaggerate or depart from the rules of realism, knowledge of the fundamentals is going to make that work better. Even an incredibly simplified style that uses no semblance of realistic anatomy still benefits from knowledge of composition and color theory, as both will still play a role in the piece's overall visual appeal. Even if you're doing completely flat, cel-shaded, anime and cartoon-esque shading, knowledge of light and shadow will still leave you better equipped to shade it well. Drawing characters with exaggerated or unrealistic proportions is still easier and more well executed if you have an understanding of anatomy and what their proportions would look like in reality. That's because most stylization still follows the fundamental rules to some degree, regardless of how unrealistic it may be, and learning the rules does inform your ability to break them most effectively and consistently. Understanding why something looks how it does in reality leaves you better equipped to alter how it looks in your work, knowing that in reality light and shadow interact with an apple like this, and the apple takes that general form, makes it easier to draw it like this, even if the manner in which you do so only utilizes the aspects of reality that suit the style. It's not dissimilar to how drawing from reference is almost always better than drawing from imagination. I could draw this belt buckle from imagination and this one from reference, and even though neither is a realistic depiction of the reference I used, the one that did use reference will be better, because the most important elements that make it recognizable as a belt buckle in reality will be present even if the rest aren't. Drawing based on an informed understanding of the fundamentals of art is more effective than without it, regardless of the degree to which that knowledge is utilized. I've heard it likened to a toolbox. So, when I'm camping and hammering stakes into the ground to secure my tent, I'm probably not actually using a hammer, but some big rock I found. Because it's faster, the precision of a hammer isn't necessary for that task, and that means I don't have to bring one. But if I'm hanging a painting, I'm probably not gonna use some big rock I found to get the nail into the wall. I'm gonna use a hammer. Now, I could have used the hammer for either, but I chose to use it only for the task that suited it. And if I didn't have the hammer just because I didn't need it for the tent, I would have a rough time getting that nail into the wall with just a rock. Honestly, I'm horrible at hanging paintings, so it would look like I used a rock either way, but that's not the point. What is the point is that that's effectively the same for the fundamentals of art. Knowledge of them is like having all of the tools you could possibly need. You won't always need to use those tools to make good art in the style or medium that you're using, but the fact that you have them means that if you do need them, they're there, and you're not forced to improvise. It's up to you to decide how, when, and to what degree you want to apply your knowledge of the fundamentals to your work, and you certainly don't have to if you don't want to. But having that knowledge means you can if you think it would make that work better, whereas without it, you can't. I only wanted to learn how to draw people so that I could draw anime characters, at least back when I was 12. So I didn't learn how faces looked in reality, just in anime. And that set me back so much that I still struggle with faces a great deal to this day, because I didn't learn why they looked that way in anime. I didn't learn the rules of facial anatomy that anime artists use as a baseline from which to exaggerate their subjects' faces, so the way I chose to exaggerate them ended up being subpar. Even though I rarely draw in a realistic or semi-realistic style anymore, the way I draw faces in an anime style still improved significantly when I learned how to. Because before, I didn't have the metaphorical hammer to nail the painting into the wall since I decided from all of my experience camping that a rock would suffice. Now I have a hammer, and it's up to me whether or not I want to use it. If I want my apartment to look like the set of a horror movie or anyone with OCD's nightmare, I can choose not to use it to hang my paintings. But that's a deliberate choice, and I would choose it to achieve that result, not because I have no alternative. Similarly, in my art, if I choose to depict something in a way that breaks the fundamental rules, I'll now be doing so because I think it looks better that way, not because I lack the skill or knowledge to make it look any other way, or even know that it's breaking them at all. One user on Reddit put it very well, saying, "To me, there's a key difference between stylized art that shies away from realism due to a lack of skill or confidence, and art that pushes past realism in pursuit of appeal. And learning the rules before you break them almost always puts you in the latter category rather than the former. And it's that effectiveness in doing so that's earned it the favor of everyone who sincerely believes that it's the right and best way to learn art. But for all of the people who do, there are just as many who don't. And those who don't do, contrary to popular belief, have more reasons for criticizing it than simply not wanting to do it. And while we'll get to those in a second, second, it's also worth acknowledging that that in and of itself is not a bad reason either. Artists make art because they want to express themselves how they want, in the style and medium they want, and by depicting the subjects they want. The vast majority of artists are motivated to learn art by that desire and that desire alone, and telling them that they have to wait to do things their way until they've learned how to do it the right way first may very well turn them off of art altogether. They want to express their creativity in the way that made them fall in love with art in the first place, and being told that they need to meet a bunch of qualifications and spend a long time not expressing it that way just to earn the right to, because that's the only way they'll ever be any good at it, very well might make them fall right back out of love with art. If someone told me I needed to spend 3 years learning strategy and studying esports just to play League of Legends, I never would have started playing it, and I probably would have been better off, but that's a separate issue. I do watch strategy videos and occasionally study what relevant esports players are doing now so that I can get better, but if I'd been told that that was the only way I'd ever be good at it, I wouldn't have bothered. A lot of people feel the same with art, and being told that the fundamentals have to be learned before anything they want to do for fun can be drawn. Learning the fundamentals is daunting as hell. There are a lot of them, and studying them requires the right educational materials, a lot of hard work, consistent exercises, and difficult challenges. If we gatekeep art by saying the only way to ever be good at it is to do all of that before even trying to draw what you want, we'll overwhelm a lot of people who don't have the time, energy, or resources to do so, and drive them away from ever pursuing art. It stifles creativity to be told that there's one linear learning path that needs to be completed before an artist can make the work they really want to make. And not only can the vastness of that linear learning path intimidate some people enough that they give up, it can take all the joy out of art for people who don't give up. If studying and practicing the fundamentals doesn't give you any joy or creative fulfillment, doing nothing but that just to get good enough to draw what does give you joy and creative fulfillment is gonna burn you out so fast, turning making art from something you loved and looked forward to doing into a dreaded chore that you now have to do. As one Reddit user put it, "It took falling in love with the fun of drawing for years before I was willing to suffer for improvement," a sentiment that I've heard many share. And if artists aren't allowed to fall in love with that fun first, they may lose all motivation to even want to improve. And sacrificing happiness and creativity to achieve that improvement isn't just a problem because, well, it sucks, but also because we're effectively told that we have to in order to become good artists. And I don't know anymore if that's really true. That was always the part of the learn the rules first advice that I never questioned, that even if it sucked, it worked, and it worked better than any other approach. And like far too many of my opinions that I'm glad I have challenged every day in this community, it was an arrogant one. I felt that way because it's what I was told, sure, but also, and even primarily, because it worked for me. Facial anatomy aside, I learned the fundamentals before learning stylization, and it made me a better artist. And when I started learning the fundamentals of facial anatomy, my stylized facial anatomy improved, further solidifying my belief that that was the best order in which to learn, even if it wasn't the fun one. But not everyone learns the same way. Everyone is different, and learning the rules before you break them might not be the only or best method of study for everyone. There's no one-size-fits-all way to learn art. Even if an artist is genuinely dedicated to improvement as a serious goal, focusing solely on studying the fundamentals before letting themselves experiment with the stylization they seek might not be the best way for them to achieve that goal. The basis of the argument in defense of this advice is that knowing the fundamentals prevents you from making mistakes in your stylization. But some people learn by making mistakes, not by learning how not to make them. There are hands-on learners who learn best by doing, even if doing before they know how to yields a subpar result. They learn more from making that subpar result and having it be corrected and improved upon than they would have if they'd studied how to create the ideal result in the first place. There are others who struggle with attention and aren't able to focus on studies that they don't find engaging for long periods of time, who would actually suffer in terms of the efficiency of their learning if they were forced to do so anyway and learn all of the fundamentals before creating anything they enjoyed. People learn differently, so they benefit from different advice. The method most effective for one might not be for another. But before we get into how that conclusion changed my opinion, I want to acknowledge a lesser discussed but equally important criticism of the learn the rules first advice, that it teaches us that the only good art is art that either follows those rules or breaks them the right way. Overly restrictive rules and adherence to them is liable to stifle creativity just as much as the obligation to learn them. Sometimes artists thrive by breaking rules unintentionally because they didn't know they existed, and plenty of art that is fundamentally wrong based on those rules is absolutely gorgeous. Not despite the fact that it's technically incorrect based on them, but because it is. The fundamentals give us guidelines on how to make something look visually appealing through accuracy. But not everyone defines visual appeal by accuracy. Not everyone defines the quality of art by its effective adherence to, or exaggeration of, conventional rules. If we tell people there's a right way and a wrong way to express themselves through art, and they need to learn a bunch of rules in order to do so, it confines art to being a form of expression that's limited to a handful of acceptable criteria that meets particular standards if it's to be considered good. It devalues all art that doesn't follow those rules, and it tells artists that their expression of creativity is less valuable than their ability to express it, quote-unquote, right. AmpTunes gives a very well-put example, saying, "Sometimes when the rules aren't yet deep down in your body, when you don't know that you should search the fabric store for the shiniest silk, sometimes you grab the cellophane instead, and most of the time it's gonna be awkward and unattractive. And sometimes you're gonna make a cellophane dress that will dazzle the runway." Some of the world's most revolutionary art is art that pays absolutely no mind to the fundamentals at all, and suggesting that that diminishes its quality, value, and significance is to do it and artists everywhere an unacceptable disservice. You don't need to know a thing about the fundamentals to make beautiful art, because what qualifies as beautiful art is completely subjective. Some may define it by its technical accuracy, yes, but others will find it beautiful based solely on how it makes them feel. Learning the fundamentals before stylization is arguably the best way to make conventionally good art on a technical level. But art that's good on a technical level is not the only art that's good. So, as you can see, there's more to this issue than meets the eye. People don't just hate hearing this advice because it's demoralizing or boring or daunting. They also hate it because it's not right for everyone. And there are plenty of instances in which following it might do an artist's improvement more harm than good. But there's also a lot of value in following it for others, even if only to varying degrees. And it does get a lot of unfair hate from people who misinterpret it. When people hear "learn the rules before you break them," they take that to mean learn realism before the style you want. And that's not really what that means. And that misunderstanding turns a lot of artists with no interest in realism off of following it. People don't want to learn realism if that's not the style they want to work in. And the suggestion that they have to in order to succeed at that style is demotivating, incorrect, and not actually what this advice means. Learn the rules first doesn't mean learn and practice the techniques used in realism before you learn the ones required of stylization. It means learn the fundamentals that are present in reality and therefore should inform all or at least most art, regardless of style. And I honestly do agree with that, at least to some degree. I think it's better to have a hammer even if you choose to use a rock. I think it's important to understand why things look the way they do in reality in order to thoroughly and completely develop your art skills regardless of style. Because there are aspects of reality that are likely to influence and be present in all art, regardless of how accurate it's intended to be. Knowing the general anatomical rules that dictate how the human body is built and how it moves improves even styles with the most oversimplified anatomy. Knowing how light interacts with different types of materials and how different light sources create different forms of highlights and shadows improves even styles with the most basic of rendering. Knowing what elements create a visually compelling composition is important for almost any kind of illustration, as is the knowledge of color theory required to know why certain colors look better with others and how to use them all in a balanced manner. And you can learn all of that without learning the techniques required to depict anything realistically. You don't need to learn realism to learn the fundamentals, even if doing so might help. It'll involve some degree of practice in a largely realistic style if you want to thoroughly familiarize yourself with the core concepts, but learning everything it takes to draw realism well is not necessary to understand the fundamentals enough to use them in your desired style. That said, even with that more favorable interpretation of learn the rules first in mind, my opinion has still changed as to whether or not that's even good advice. I no longer think every artist needs to learn the rules before they break them, and I no longer think it's better for every artist to instead learn the rules while they break them. Considering all of the many factors that play a part in the effectiveness of this advice, I don't think there's any interpretation of it that will be best for everyone. The more I think about it, the more I feel it's entirely subjective. Some artists do need to learn the rules before they break them in order to understand them well enough to develop their skills. Others will find that too daunting and instead prefer the balance of learning those rules in the art that they make for study while breaking them in the art that they make for fun. Others still will learn more effectively by letting themselves break them and figuring out how not to in the process, while many will also simply see no value in the rules at all, if technical improvement isn't something they're seeking so much as the ability to just make art that they like for fun. Hell, some artists thrive by making their own rules with no regard for those established by the fundamentals, and learning them at all could even stifle their ability to. Education has been one size fits all for far too long, and this piece of art advice feels like it falls into the same pitfall. People learn differently based on their levels of skill and aptitude, preferences, personalities, learning styles, and so much more. There need to be different methods and approaches to learning that suit each one, rather than one method that's supposed to be right for everyone. That's not just the case with art, but with all of education. On paper, there's a correct, optimal curriculum to teach students with, but in a classroom, every student will have a different way of learning, and that correct and optimal curriculum in practice will not be equally effective for for all of them. And I think that's what's most important to consider when determining the value of learning the rules before you break them in art. I don't think the advice itself is bad. I think it's bad to give it to all artists regardless of who they are, how they learn, what their goals are, and what they value. The advice itself, in my opinion, isn't the problem, but rather the rigidity with which it's given, with some people claiming it's good advice for everyone and others saying it's good for no one. It will help some artists improve immensely. It will hold others back or even deter them from pursuing art to begin with. So I think it should be given and considered on a case-by-case basis, rather than revered as the only right way to learn art or hated as the most restrictive and unnecessary. As far as I'm concerned, you can learn the rules before you break them, learn the rules while you break them, or forget the rules altogether and just do what feels right. Whatever helps you improve most depends solely on you. Knowing the fundamentals is objectively important when it comes to creating technically proficient art, but how and when you learn them is completely up to you. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Special thank you as always to channel members Joseph Solomon, TC Pratt, Zelda Devarag42, Haruki Saluzzo, King Good James, CP Will Thing, Art of Amethyst Fable, Extinction Animation, and Andy the Hedgehog, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, Cora Fear, Jamisha Walker, Alengshi, Kim Yen, Crazy Yasar, Gentong, Grayson Xavier, Blah Mage, TC Pratt, Finn, Celine Merriman, Ash, Eldritchia, The Stray Dog, Allura, Greg Noble, Decagon, Jenny Chan, Catbus, Mac, Lucy Yamajiki, Selena Beebe, Pryday, Totally Shogun, Insomniac Sleep Schedule, Wing Tang Wong, and Marie Greer, and I'll see you in the next one.